Hi everyone, this is my response to Module 6, which asked us to look at how youth are represented in popular films. For this assignment, I chose to look at Mean Girls. For those of you who haven't seen Mean Girls before, it is a movie that's set in a high school setting with a new student as the focus. So this new student's name is Katie Heron. She was a homeschool girl who lived in Africa because her parents were zoologists. But now that her mother has a permanent job in the city in the United States, that she has now transferred to the school to complete the rest of her education. So she really, really wants to fit into the school. She makes a couple of friends on the first day, and they end up convincing her to go and mess with the popular girls because the popular girls have drawn interest in her. And so she hangs out with them and starts to act like them and ends up losing her real friends in the end. So it's a really interesting movie in the way that it looks at high school dynamics and negative stereotypes. In response to the movie, I decided to answer the following question. How do negative stereotypes and stereotypical representations of youth feature in the film, and what might be done in schools to prevent such negative representations? So to start, I'm going to look at the negative stereotypes that were highlighted in Mean Girls. First, there was Karen Smith, and now Karen Smith was part of the plastics that meant she was one of the popular girls in the class, in the whole school actually. However, they portrayed her as a pretty, dumb blonde. How many times have we heard that term before, where a blonde is pretty, but also dumb? So at one point, Regina George, who is the head bee or queen bee of the group, says Karen should be spring queen, but she's so stupid no one wants to vote for her. And then one of the other students in the school also says that she spelled orange with a K. So the way that she's represented doesn't focus on her good qualities. It only reinforces the negative stereotypes of dumb blonde. Now looking further into the plastics and their whole queen bee hierarchy, we have Regina George. And now that is a name that has been heard if you've ever been in a high school setting before, because Regina George is a huge character in this movie. She is your stereotypical mean girl. She is the reason the movie is called Mean Girls. She's blonde, she's pretty, she's rich, everybody likes her. And it's said in the movie at one point that Regina only has followers because she's mastered making girls feel inferior next to how pretty she is, and she uses guys to feel superior because of their attention. So she is not nice. She has a lot of things where she's manipulating and bullying and harassing other students. She creates a book called the Burn Book, which I'll talk more about later. Really, she's just the queen bee of the hierarchy. She's your mean girl. You stay out of her way, but you want to be like her. The third stereotype that I want to look at is Damien. Now, Damien is a gay guy in this high school setting. However, they play him very, very feminine, which is not the way that many individuals who are homosexual act, but they're stereotypically labeling him as homosexual in this movie, making him feminine, making him all these things that draws attention to him and makes him bullied. At one point, even his best friend says he's too gay to function, which is not an okay term, but is said in the movie, just reinforcing the stereotype of the stereotypical gay. And then finally, there's the cliques. And if you've been in any school whatsoever, you'll know there are cliques. No matter what school, it's just part of this hierarchy of the schools and how people find friends and all this kind of stuff. But the thing about the cliques is that there's always bullying and harassment involved in them as well, especially if you're not in the top tier of the popularity hierarchy. So in Mean Girls, they use cliques as a background piece because the plastics are a clique, but that's the only clique they really truly focus on. They mostly highlight the cliques when they're talking about the cafeteria. Where can you sit? Where can't you sit? Because you need to sit at the right table, otherwise you make a label for yourself as being different. So, for example, they have Asian nerds or JV jocks or preps or desperate wannabes, and then, of course, the plastics. With all this being said, we're missing the aspect of social media in this movie because the movie was made in 2002. So all the bullying, all the harassment, all the negativity that happened in this movie was isolated for the most part to the classroom, to the school setting, or the physical setting in which the students were at. It didn't go elsewhere from there. And that isn't necessarily how today's youth are operating because technology is so readily available to them. So in class, we talked about the importance of social media in today's day and age, and the negative consequences of social media are so similar to the burn book that we saw in Mean Girls, because the burn book was a basic form of social media, I want to say, because it was a book that contained everybody's flaws, any blackmail points they could use to be able to get what they wanted from that individual. And at one point in the movie, the pages of the burn book are distributed around the school, and you can see the school just go into chaos because all these girls are upset. Who told my secret? How did they find out about this? All this kind of stuff that was supposed to be private but then ended up being aired to everybody else. And that's how social media works. It's all this stuff that we assume is private gets aired out to everybody else. The bullying follows us home now, which is just something that isn't seen in this movie because it is so isolated to the school setting. In one of my class discussions, we actually talked about how kids these days are using social media to get attention in the same way that Regina George wanted attention in her school, how she strived for that popularity because she was attractive and all these kinds of things. But the way they're doing it now is through social media. They're making these posts, they're posting these pictures, they're trying to get all their friends and people to like their pictures. And if they don't get enough likes, they'll take that picture down. And so a lot of their self-esteem, their self-image is now illustrated in social media, which can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, because it allows these people to build these points for bullying and harassment. But if they're well liked, they're also going to get likes, and so it makes them feel better about themselves. It's so chaotic and crazy, and there's so many different aspects that can just absolutely turn everything around on social media. I think all of this being said about social media, though, reflects the point that a lot of teachers are blaming students instead of changing the way in which we educate our youth. So Giroux makes a point in his article that it makes more sense for educators to re-examine the mission of the school and the changing conditions of youth, rather than blaming the students for the economic slump, the culture of racially coded violence, or the hopelessness that seems endemic to the dominant versions of the future. That means us as teachers, we are responsible for the change we want to see in our students. If we think that they need help learning to be socially aware and be a social global citizen, that means they need to know how to use social media in a way that eliminates the chances of bullying, of harassment, of all these negative things, because technology, although negative in some ways, can also be a platform for change and for all these wonderful things that students can do. I just want to take a step back right now and talk about the negative ramifications that come from bullying that we need to focus on in our school setting, because I've talked a lot about how social media works and how we need to change the way the kids use social media for good rather than negative means. But when we fail to do this, when we fail to realize it because it's not happening right in front of us, all these stereotypes that are coming, all these negative stereotypes that we saw in Mean Girls that are reflected in our schools lead to the bullying, lead to further risk of depression and suicide and anxieties, because students often see these stereotypes as a way that some other students are different, that they're weak, that they're falling into some cliques, they're not the same as I am, therefore I don't like them and I'm going to bully them because I don't know who they are, but they're not like me. Beasley articulated this point very, very well in her article as well. This being said, a lot of this focus comes onto the LGBTQ community right now because it's so high profile, and with the lack of education that teachers have on how to be inclusive and have this inclusive curriculum that shows people how we are all equal and the same, and our differences make us unique, not weird, is crucial. In a blog written by Nelson and Bisharat, sorry if I butchered that name, they talk about how an inclusive curriculum that provides the opportunity to deal with these stereotypes and really change the way in which students see each other is essential, because they need to be able to see that people are different from themselves, and that is okay. So students really need to be able to be encouraged to reflect on their actions and prejudice, to learn from their peers who are different from them, to support their allies, to stand up against prejudice and hate. Building that environment in your classroom, in your school, is crucial for overcoming these negative stereotypes. Therefore, it's the teacher who sets the tone for this. providing awareness on anti-bullying. They're helping students have these seminars on how to use social media, these assemblies, all these kinds of things. They might seem ineffective at the time because your students don't pay attention as much as you wish, but they are essential to help them learn, because where else are they going to learn the information on how to be safe using social media, how to respect others, how to be a global citizen who is kind and trusting and a good person. Finally, I want to talk about some ways in which we as teachers can establish these goals that I've talked about before by creating these environments and being able to just nurture the students into good, positive role models, because our job as teachers is not just to develop them academically, but to develop them to be successful for the rest of their lives. So in an article written by Gordon, she discusses the ways in which we can actually help our students, particularly those who are affected by the actions of bullies and or mean girls, as it were, if we're going to reference back to the movie, by making sure you as a teacher have an open door policy. You are showing that your students can come talk to you whenever they need to, that they will have your support, so that they know they have this outlet to talk to and somebody who can help make it better. Because a lot of the time teachers are ignorant of what's going on, and that can cause so much problems because the students are also not being heard at home. So if you're providing this environment where they feel like they can trust you, they're safe to come and talk to you, then you're really putting one step forward to help them reduce the chances of the negative side effects of stereotypes. I also believe that use of assemblies, as said before, and just to bring around the anti-bullying, bring around that social media awareness is just so essential, because it gets them in a situation where they're seeing all this stuff, they're learning, they're watching what bad can happen on the internet. So they're learning how to do all these good things. And also, with that being said, you as a teacher need to be able to answer the questions of, why can't we do this way? Why do we need to do it this way? What is safe? What is not safe when it comes to social media? So that means you as a teacher, you need to be educated as well. It was particularly evident in the Mean Girls movie that the teachers didn't intervene or support any of the students until it went too far. So Regina was able to have control of the school, beat bullies and blackmail and all this kind of stuff, because the teachers just backed off and let it happen. But a lot of these problems could have been intervened so much earlier if they just sat down, talked to the students. If you believe you're able to tackle a situation so much earlier, you can create an environment in which all students are safe, informed, and welcome in the school setting. I know a lot of health classes right now are actually focusing on bullying in their health, because bullying is such a big problem. It comes on social media, it follows them home, it makes them feel like they're lesser than they are. And so really focusing on helping students and informing students of the consequences of their actions, the negative sides of everything, really supports them, really goes a long way to building an environment where everybody can feel safe. And I think one of the biggest biases right now is if you don't see it, it's not there. And that's one approach we as teachers cannot take. And so, to summarize all of this, the Mean Girls movie does a really good job of portraying negative stereotypes, but also a happy ending, because at the end, they all come together and they really form bonds, come beyond the stereotypes to a point where they can see their differences, acknowledge their differences, and feel unique in their own ways. So in that way, I think Mean Girls is a good movie to show our students as a way of teaching them how to overcome these situations and how to be better than they are today. That being said, a lot of things in the movie are inappropriate, so I don't know if I'd actually show it in a classroom setting. But I think that the attitude, the negative, the lessons that are learned in the movie are crucial for any student's development to becoming a better student and a better person overall.